I'd like to introduce again Leah Hobson of the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations.
Hi everyone. Hang on, is that a bit better? Yep. Okay. I'm short. Mics always need to be adjusted for me. Thank you for having me here today. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and paying my respect to their elders past and present. As Jen just said, my name is Leah Hobson. I'm the NDIS Engagement Project Officer at the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, which we call AFDO because clearly there just aren't enough acronyms in this sector. So AFDO is a founding member of the National Disability and Carer Alliance, which was formed about 3 years ago, and it consists of AFDO representing people with disability across Australia, Carers Australia representing families and carers, and National Disability Services representing specialist disability service providers. The three organisations came together to try and work cooperatively to make the lives of people with disability, their families and carers better. And they decided that in the first instance, priority number one should be the NDIS and making sure that that goes from being something that's just a good idea to becoming a reality for people with disability, their families and carers. So we've been given some funding by the federal government through the Department of Families, Housing, Community Services and Indigenous Affairs, which becomes FACSIA, because again, not enough acronyms, and to go around and talk to people across the country about how the NDIS should look, what they think the NDIS should be. I'm going to get onto that in a little bit, but I wanted to begin by giving you a little bit of background about the NDIS, because what we've been finding as we go around the country is that people will sort of sidle up to me and say, you know, Leah, I'm really certain that I need to be giving you some feedback about the NDIS. I'm really certain that the NDIS is important. You've heard our politicians say that this morning. I just don't know what it is. Can you give me some background? So that's what I'm going to do this morning. There are a lot of places you could start talking about the NDIS, and again, you've heard the politicians mention the Productivity Commission report. So that's where I'm going to start. The Productivity Commission is a bunch of researchers and economists who think about hard problems for government, go away and come back with some suggestions on how they can be resolved. The government asked them in 2010 to look at disability care and support. And so they went around the country and spoke to lots of people. They got over 1,000 submissions. They went away and did their own research. And they came to what I'm sure will be a shocking conclusion to everybody in this room. The system we have doesn't work. It's not working very well at all for anybody. It doesn't provide people with choice. It's fragmented. It's all over the place. So they recommended a few things. They recommended, the main recommendation was that there should be two schemes. The bigger one is called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and they anticipated that that would cover about 410,000 people with permanent disability, but it significantly affects their daily lives across the country. The smaller scheme is called the National Injury Insurance Scheme, and that would be for people who experience a catastrophic injury which leads to a significant disability. And that scheme in a way isn't so much the establishment of something new and very different, it's the strengthening and widening of a lot of existing schemes already. So states have schemes for people who injure themselves at work and become disabled, and some places like Victoria have something like a Transport Accident Commission, which will cover people's support needs if they become injured or disabled through something like a car crash. So I'm just going to focus a bit on the disability insurance scheme. What the Commission envisaged it would do is that it would be nationally consistent for starters, because we all know that there are rules all over the place that are different about what you can get and where you can get it from, and you know, can you take it outside of your house? Can you take it from school back home? You know, there's all sorts of funny rules. So they want it to be nationally consistent. They want it to be a good pool of funding, and they also want people with disability and their families to have some choice in how that money is spent. So one of the big questions we get about the NDIS is, well, am I going to be in it? At this stage, that's something that the government is still working on. But the Productivity Commission recommended that the NDIS should be for people who fall into one of three categories if they have a permanent and significant disability. The first one is that they have an ongoing need for support with mobility, self-care, communication or self-management. So this covers a whole range of different types of disability, from intellectual disability to sensory to cognitive, and even people who have psychosocial disabilities, sometimes known as mental illness, which is significant and enduring. The second category is for people for whom early intervention would make a big difference in the way they function and the way they live. So that's people who might have progressive conditions like MS, but it's also people for whom if you get in early and provide a lot of support, they get some benefits. So that's people with things like autism spectrum disorder or cerebral palsy. And the third category is for people who have been able to argue that they need significant support and that getting that support is going to make their lives a lot better. So it's important to note that the government's still working this out. They don't have all of the answers on eligibility. It's also important to note that the Productivity Commission said that a much wider goal of the scheme should be to provide information and referral. So if you can't get funded supports in those categories, you'll still be able to go to them and say, I want to be able to go to my local swimming pool, but I need some support. Who can I call? What do I do? And they should be able to give you some information. So what kind of supports is the NDIS going to offer? The Productivity Commission, again, in a very shocking finding, found that if you individualise the kind of supports that someone can get, if you tailor it to the person, you get good outcomes. So they've said that the system should be as individualised and as tailored as possible. That means that if you get a package of support under the NDIS, you'll have a couple of options. You'll be able to just go, okay, I'm going to choose one service provider or several service providers, and here you go, do your thing, as long as I get what I need, that's fabulous. The second option would be to go to a new thing called a disability support organisation, which would do a lot of administrative bits, and they would pull together a package of support for you. So maybe you want a bit from a service provider, but maybe you then also want to do something that's a bit different and not covered by the service system, but still meets your disability needs. So they would help pull all of those little bits together. And the third option is to be completely individualised, so that you would do the hiring and firing of your own staff, you would have complete control over the sort of supports that you got, and you would have complete responsibility for all of the paperwork as well, which I'm sure is an appealing prospect to many people. The Productivity Commission said that they would like to see a lot of all of the currently available kind of supports still available under an NDIS. So that's, covering things like aids and equipment, like therapies, like home and vehicle modifications, like accommodation and personal care support. But they also want to see some creative and new things be able to spring up to cover people's needs in ways that they haven't happened before. So they've come up with a bit of a test to see, okay, well, what should be covered by the NDIS and what shouldn't? And what they said that test should look like is that it should be about what's reasonable and what's necessary. And those are very broad terms. So again, that's another thing that's being nailed down. And it would be really good to hear from young people with disability exactly what you think should be reasonable and necessary in terms of the support that you get for your disability. So the government got this report from the Productivity Commission, which said, okay, do all of these things, and while you're at it, double the funding for disability. Because if you don't double the funding, while it looks expensive at the start, it's actually going to be more expensive in the long run if you don't do that. So set up more funding, do all of these other things that I've just talked about. And the government, within 10 days, came back and said, yes, we agree in principle. We're going to set up a whole bunch of committees, because we love committees, we're government, to look at this and to try and move forward. And very quickly, the opposition came on board as well. So over the past few months, the government's been working towards building some launch sites. And the launch sites will go live in July of next year. They will cover 10,000 people to start with, and then 20,000 people in the second year of the launch. And those sites, you heard the Honourable Andrea Coote mentioned before that one is in Barwon in Victoria. There is another one in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, which is around Newcastle. There is another one that will cover the whole of the ACT. And then there are two that will specifically look at young people. So the first of those will be in all of South Australia. People up to the age of 15 will be covered in the launch site. And in Tasmania, people between 15 and 24 will be covered. So if you're in one of those places, it's particularly important that you have your say. Unfortunately, we don't yet know a lot of things. We don't know what's going to happen after 2015. We don't know what the funding will be post that point. We don't know how they're going to roll it out more broadly. We don't know for sure exactly what eligibility and supports are going to look like. But that's also, while it's a very uncertain thing, it's also really, really positive, because it means you've still got a chance to have your voice heard. And that's what we're out there doing. We're going around the country and we're talking to people with disability, to their families and to service providers about what they think the NDIS should look like. Our website is www.disabilitycareralliance.org.au. I'm sorry, I had hoped to have a presentation up, but we're having some technical difficulties with that. So it's www.disabilitycareralliance.org.au. We're running some meetings across the country, but we've also got a survey online, and we're going to be running a workshop after this session today. The feedback that we get from you goes directly to ministers. It goes directly to the advisory group, one of the committees that the government set up, and it goes to the federal government department that is funding us and which is doing a lot of the work around the NDIS. So if you want to be involved in any of those ways, please come along and have a chat to us. If you want to find me throughout the conference, Ellie will be more than happy to take your food snippets, and I will be more than happy to have a chat. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Leah. And now I'd like to invite Joel Derbyshire, who is with the Client and Community Engagement section of the NDIS Launch Transition Agency. Thank you, Joel.
So do we have any slides? Is the PowerPoint
Just
working?
give me 1 second to talk to Matt.
That's all right. We'll just see if we can get some slides up, but I might just start without them. First, thanks to Leah for her overview of the NDIS, and I hope that it did give you a good sense of what the NDIS is all about, and particularly thank her for her information about the Alliance Engagement Project, because that engagement is a really critical thing. Hello, I'm Joel Derbyshire. I'm a graduate at the NDIS Launch Transition Agency, and I'm currently working in the Client and Community Engagement team, which falls under Launch Implementation Group. So my job is really about engaging with people with disability, their families and their carers, about the launch of the NDIS in those first stage locations. So today I just want to give a brief overview of what the NDIS really means to me from a personal perspective. And then I'll get into the really important stuff about how you can be heard and the different mechanisms for engaging with the current stage of the NDIS. So to me, the NDIS is just about doing something right. I think that really has two core aspects. And one is just improving the daily lives of the many people with disability who are living day to day with unmet needs, who are living with limited access to services, and their day-to-day life is just not acceptable. We have a good sense of what's right and wrong in our society, and I'm sure everyone here today knows that there are people living with just unacceptable circumstances in terms of support. Another key aspect about the scheme that I think is very important is the opportunity to achieve life goals. So everyone has to do their own work to achieve their life goals, but having the opportunity to do that is what I'm talking about. So my hope for the NDIS is a system that meets people's needs, and then it goes beyond that to provide support where necessary to enable people to do that work, to take advantage of opportunities in their life to achieve their life goals. So I had a goal to go to university and get a job where I could make a difference. Thought it was a very reasonable goal, and I studied hard and I took advantage of opportunities presented to me. And of course, everyone should have the chance to take advantage of similar opportunities, and they shouldn't be disadvantaged by any particular support needs. We all want to live in a world of equal opportunity, and I think the NDS is a very real and fantastic step towards that world. So that's just some of my personal thoughts, but what's much more important is actively listening to potential NDIS clients about what an NDIS means to them, about what an NDIS means to you in this room today. And so I'm here today and tomorrow. I'm here to listen and collect information and feed that up to my managers and the rest of the team who are working on implementing the first stage of the NDIS in launch locations. I also want to make sure that everyone here today is informed of the current approach to engagement and how the experiences from the first stage will be used. The NDIS is about lifetime support, so we're committed to ensuring that the focus of the scheme, processes and scope are understanding and responsive of the needs of young people, just like it would be understanding and responsive of the needs of children or adults. So let's have a look at some of the ways that you can engage with the NDIS. Leah briefly mentioned the NDIS Advisory Group. They were established by the Australian Government in 2011 to draw on their own knowledge and connections to people with disability, their families and carers, to ensure that people with a lived experience are included in the design of an NDIS. So the advisory group takes on feedback to inform government on the design of the scheme, and one of their first initiatives is an online forum called Your Say. So I was hoping to give you a bit of a look what Your Say looks like. It's www.yoursay.ndis.gov.au. It's a forum to present your views on the design elements of the scheme. It's a space to share your stories and experiences, and the advisory group has commenced asking design questions on that forum. So they're questions about who should be eligible and what is reasonable and necessary. And there'll be a number of forums over the coming months asking a series of key questions about the design, and the NDIS advisory group can take that information to advise government. So the first forum was, what do you look for in a disability support worker or service provider? I checked it this morning. I think it had 146 comments. And the second forum is about eligibility and reasonable and necessary. What is reasonable and necessary? And for every comment on the forum, you can choose to reply, to agree, or to disagree. So I think, it's a very useful tool at this stage at providing a chance to comment on some of the very high-level policy. One of the things that I'll be working on in my role in the Launch Transition Agency is co-design. So co-design is a process of working with people to explore what they want in a system, what's possible, and what's viable. So for the NDIS, it'll be local involvement, small representative groups, and detailed focus questions. And it'll explore both that high-level policy, like the definition of eligibility and reasonable and necessary, and also it'll explore operational processes. And we refer to that as the client pathway. So it's a chance for people with disability to have an input on what the process looks like. What pathway does someone take as they move through an NDIS? So it's about involving potential future users to ensure that the system takes account of their needs and preferences, I hope you're all wondering about how you can get involved. At this stage, it'll be targeted for people in launch locations, and there's a commitment that it'll be ongoing and more widespread as we have learnings and experiences to talk about from launching the scheme. Another way that you'll be able to get involved is through town hall forums. They'll be held again in launch locations for the general public. They'll provide updates on the progress of the scheme, and all details of that will be on our website, ndis.gov.au. There'll also be a chance to for government to listen to questions, and yeah, so it'll be an interactive forum as well as an information session. And just generally learning from the first stage, if you live in a launch location and you're able to participate, I really encourage you to look for opportunity to provide feedback on what works and what doesn't. Those opportunities should be advertised on the website, or there'll be information locally when the time comes. So the really core key purpose of the first stage is to inform what a national scheme, how the national rollout will work. So if you are involved in the launch, we really encourage you to be providing feedback, because it will make a big difference to the rollout. So as I said, I'm here today and tomorrow to listen, so please come up and talk to me and introduce yourself. I can't wait to meet all of you, especially those who I haven't met already. And I can feed that information up to my managers and the implementation team. I'm not in a position to take detailed questions on the scheme today, but I do have a question, or maybe several, for all of you. So the first one is, did you know about what we're doing, the current approach to engagement? And so that would be things like your say, or emailing us at ndisinquiries@faxia.gov.au. So can I just see a show of hands for anyone who's logged into your say? And is there a few? We've got a couple. So yeah, I definitely really encourage you to get involved there. At the moment, the definitions of eligibility and reasonable and necessary on the Your Say forum, not as final definitions, they're there for you to comment on. So I definitely encourage all of you to get on the website and have a say, and look out for all the other opportunities on the NDIS website. You can subscribe for updates, so look for those opportunities to get involved and have your say. If you have any questions about getting involved, just come and talk to me, and I'm here as a representative to listen and feed that information up today and tomorrow. So yeah, please come and talk to me, and thank you again very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Joel. Now, luckily for us, we've actually got a couple of extra minutes. So first of all, I'd like to say I really encourage anyone and everyone, particularly our young people, to have a chat with Leah and Joel about everything they've been talking about. Ask them questions, give them your input. It's a really, really special opportunity that you've got to have the chance to do that with them. So I think we're actually going to have a couple of minutes for some questions and or responses, if that's okay with you two. But just before we do that, I actually realised I've got a little bag of goodies under my table here, so forgive me for a second. There we go. First of all, I'd like to take a little bit of a step back and just give a little bit of a thank you present and a thank you applause to Senator Mitch Fifield and the Honourable Andrea Coote. And I've got some too for our other guests, but I think we'll wait till after questions. So I might actually ask Helen to come up, and she's going to bring around, hold it out there, the roving mic. So if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, a couple of things. Obviously put your hand up. We'll try and get around to everybody with the mic. Just wait till we get the mic to you. If you'd like to address your question specifically to either Leah or Joel, please let us know. Otherwise, general is also okay. Is anyone brave enough to ask a question and or make a comment at this stage? I know you're all thinking things. Oh, up the back, we've got someone. Lovely. Now Helen's just going to bring the mic down for you. We hope it works. We haven't tested it yet, so we'll just see. Ah, there we go. Helen's lovely voice.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I'm from Women with Disabilities ACT. My question is to Joel. How does the government plan to ensure that employment opportunities are available to people with disabilities? Like, are there any concrete measures?
Thanks for your question. I think a key thing about the NDIS is it's person-centred and goal-based. So if one of your goals is to move into employment, then definitely the NDIS should be in its core principles designed to help you achieve those goals. And of course, there's a big role for disability employment services there. Don't know how much more I can say. Did you think that answers your question? Leah?
Can I just add to that those of you who have been to ndis.gov.au and signed up for updates will have seen one in the last few days that says that the government has called for expressions of interest for people with disability or people with lived experience of disability to express an interest in working in the launch sites if they want to be a part of the NDIS that way. So the government is actually looking towards employing people with disability and people with lived experience as part of this as well. If you're interested in working in disability, go check out that call for expressions of interest.
Thank you. Is there any other comments or questions? Yes, Helen, over there. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Naomi. I'm from Leaders for Tomorrow. I'm just wondering what kind of levels of screening there are for people to get onto the scheme. I just know from conversations I've had with people trying to rort Centrelink, just trying to get services. I'm just wondering what kind of levels there'll be to make sure that people with a disability are actually getting the services rather than...
Okay, so the question is basically around eligibility for the NDIS as the system stands and what measures are in place to stop people from trying to rort that system.
As I mentioned, the eligibility criteria is still something that's up for discussion, and it's up on the Your Say forum right now for people to talk about. And I think once those eligibility criteria are defined, then we can work to operationalise that and how will we assess people based on that criteria.
All right, great question. Anybody else? Comments are okay as well. Yep, up the back there, Helen. Yep.
Hi there. You mentioned that there are some sites where some launch sites that are specifically focusing on young people. Just wondering what's being done to actually reach out to those young people to make sure that they're aware that they can give feedback.
Okay, so the question is around the fact that some of the NDIS launch sites are focusing specifically on young people of various defined ages, and the question is around how it is that we're making sure that those young people can actually be reached and be told that they can have a say and given that opportunity.
Do you want to start with the Alliance engagement?
Just to start with, the Alliance project is going around the country talking to people of all ages about the NDIS, and as I said, we've got a website where people can contribute as well. We're just about to get Facebook up and running, and we're hoping to get a lot of feedback from people who are younger through those networks as well. We'd really appreciate all of you who are here today are people who live in communities of you would know other people with disabilities. You would be able to take back this information to your own peer groups as well. So it's really important that if you know people back home who are really interested in the NDIS and are not quite sure about it, that you feed that back to them too. We're happy to talk to groups or to help people through our survey mechanisms as well as going out and doing the generic work that we're doing.
Yeah, I just want to add that it's a really good point, and we really need to make sure that young people are aware of the different opportunities to be involved. That's part of the reason we're here today, but we really need all of you to help us and to share that information. We have our website, ndis.gov.au, but unless people are there and viewing the website and getting involved, it's really not doing anything. So yeah, I definitely encourage all of you to get involved and to share that information with your various networks, and we'll work our best to make sure we're getting that information out there as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that too, definitely on the idea of the best way to get things out there is for everyone to try and get it out there. So I'm sure some of you have blogs that people are following, have Twitter accounts, all that sort of stuff. Do the best you can to get that out there for other people as well. And simple tip, but something important to think about, keep this program, because by the end of 2 days, I'm sure you'll be looking back going, now who are those people that spoke and what do I have to Google to find them? So if you've got this, jump on the websites of these organisations, and I'm sure if we can work together, we can get the information out there. Are there any other questions or comments? We've probably got time for one or two more. Tess? Yep. Get to you in a minute, Tess. Yes, sorry, go for it.
I was just wondering, with the National and Disability Insurance Scheme, how do you define a disability, like with intellectual disability, physical disability, impairment, whether it's permanent disability or temporary disability? How do you kind of determine that, and how do you, does it make much of a difference?
Okay, so just for everyone else, the question was around the definition of disability that is going to be attached to the NDIS in terms of permanent versus temporary, intellectual versus physical, etc. And I think Joel's going to take this one. Okay, Leah? All right.
That's a good thing about delegating. You can ask the other person to do it. Eligibility is when we talk about defining disability, that's what we mean. Eligibility will decide who's in and who's out on the basis of disability. So those questions are still being decided, but some of the things that are being taken into consideration are, firstly, that disability isn't just about what you can physically do or not do. It's about the kind of how that impacts on your everyday life, what that means for you in your life, where you live, and how you get around having the disability that you've got. And the second thing is that they're looking at taking into account what are called episodic disabilities, things that come and go. So people who don't have a permanent disability, that's a bit of a debate, but people who might have something that hangs around all the time, but maybe sits in the background for most of the time and you're fine, and then suddenly it sneaks up on you and it's back, like multiple sclerosis does that. Some psychosocial disabilities and mental illnesses do that. Those sorts of things, they're looking at ways to make sure that those are covered as well.
Okay, we've got time for one more question from down here. Helen's just going to work her way over there. Okay.
I know you said that the NDIS will be tailored, but I'm just finding what the limitations will be for people with high needs, such as 24-hour care.
Okay, so the question is around, with the NDIS funding, what the limitations will be around people who need 24-hour care. Is that right? Yep, perfect. So I guess the question is around, is there enough funding in place? Is the system in place for 24-hour care, or is it going to be a little bit maybe less than that?
That's a good question, and I think when it comes to what's reasonable and necessary, it's, again, something that the government is still sorting out. They're still sorting out how you decide what's reasonable for somebody and what isn't. But the goal of the NDIS is to try and make sure that if people need support, they can get it. So a person comes into the system, they're assessed for what they might need, they're assessed as to what's reasonable and necessary, and then they get the support. So there aren't clear answers around that, but if somebody needed 24-hour care and support and was assessed as needing that and all of their care needs were considered to be reasonable, then the idea is that under the NDIS, if you genuinely need it, you should be able to get it.
Okay, so I think we're just about finished. I will have a few housekeepings after this, so just bear with me for a second. But I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking once again Leah Hobson and Joel Derbyshire.